And our special guest this morning is mycologist and the wonderful human being, Terri Smith. When I was telling friends about this event, almost every time they'd ask, are you talking about magic mushrooms or other mushrooms? And the answer is
we're
yes.
talking about everything. We're talking
yes,
about all
and yes. We'll be covering a lot about medicinal mushrooms as well as psilocybin. I just spent 9 hours in a car yesterday listening to a bunch of podcasts and TED Talks about fungi. And it appears that we could devote every Revel 11 event to fungi and we wouldn't run out of topics within the kingdom or queendom of fungi to talk about. Terri is joining us this morning from Jamaica, and we learned that we're kindred spirits.
And
Terri's
sisters.
mother's name was Monica Smith, which is the same name I was born with. Terri married a Smith, as did I. So we decided we're both Smiths squared. You're all going to be Smitherized this morning. So Terri,
Smith is just a worker. That's what a Smith is. We are workers.
True. It's true. So we are so thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Terri.
Thank you so much, my sister friend. How are you?
I'm very well. So let's just get started. I'm really interested in your original roots and how you got interested in mushrooms.
Oh, I wish it was a romantic story, really, but it's not. I lived in Canada since I was a teenager. And when I was around 52, I had a mini stroke. And at the same year I was 52, my grandfather was 104, and he had never had a stroke. And then he wanted to see me. He was still had all his faculty and so on. So I returned to Jamaica, and he convinced me that he would live a year, and he wanted me to be with him for the last year. So I packed up my life in Canada and came home to take care of my grandfather, who lived, till he was 105. He lived for a year and a week longer once I got here. And he made me promise that instead of packing up and going back to Canada where I'd had the stroke, I would stay in my home country for at least 10 years and I would do something. And he wanted that something to come out of my head. Don't work for anybody, make sure it comes out of your head. And so I started working with women since I'd always been a social entrepreneur. I started working with rural women planting fruit trees. And after a while of planting fruit trees, they said, we like planting the trees, but it takes a long time to turn a sapling into food and money. We need something quicker. And so mushroom was and fungus was just the fastest growing kingdom of things to go with. And so I had seen a TED Talk, and I'd been following the life of a young woman from Africa, Chida Kavera, who at 11 years old had learned how to grow mushrooms and had used mushrooms to change her life, take care of her grandmother and sibling, help to send other orphans to school. And it gave her freedom not to have to marry a 36-year-old at the age of 11. So I figured, I was like pushing 53. If an 11-year-old can do this, I could probably do it too. And so it's not very romantic. It was just very, very practical.
And so did you just learn along the way? I mean, did you take classes? And help us understand what a mycologist is. Is it the same thing as a mushroom farmer?
A mycologist is someone who works with fungus, and that kingdom. So we work with yeast and fungi and things that tend to float around in the air and belong to that family of plants of life that returns organic matter back to its original state. So fungus will, if we didn't have fungus, not only would we be missing some antibiotics and other medicine, but we'd all be covered up on the leaves and dead bodies, because it is the fungus in the world that is responsible for cleaning the environment. It attacks everything, whether it's toxic or not. A fungus is really a tough mother. It just goes after anything, a dead dog, a dead tree, dead wood. The fungus takes it on and converts it back into something useful for the environment.
I was amazed in the TED Talks and the podcast I was listening to yesterday. I swear, after listening to it all, it seems like mushrooms will save the planet, or fungi rather, save the planet and humanity and our social well-being. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I will send out, as a follow-up to all of the people who signed up, some resources, and some of these TED Talks that I listened to. One in particular was about saving the planet, with what Terri was describing as it breaking down toxins like oil spills and things like that. And we're not going to be covering that today. But why don't we start our conversation, Terri, with the benefits, the health benefits of eating mushrooms. So what are some of the top mushrooms we should all be incorporating into our diet?
Well, I'm very particular. I must give my bent as we start. So my disclaimer is I tend to stay away from mushrooms that have been grown on manure, any kind of manure, because it is the nature of mushroom to consume whatever it's planted, it's sown in. And if there is something toxic in the food you feed the mushroom tends to grab that first and hold on to it. So when you test your mushroom, the mushroom will tell you what was in it. So if you grow it on most kind of manure, then while they may not harm you, there is an element of whatever heavy metal that it picked up in the manure. So because of that, I like things that are grown on as organic a material as possible. And my favorite mushroom is really gourmet edible oyster mushroom. Because you see, the oyster mushroom helps your heart, it helps your breathing, it is fabulously tasty. It's a mimicker. So you can have the same mushroom cooked in a way to mimic the Jamaica national dish, or some jerk chicken, or some curried chicken, and whatever flavor you throw at the oyster will embrace it and taste like it. So I use oyster mushroom a lot because I can also make it a sweet dessert mushroom. And most people don't think of mushroom as sweet, but instead of using raisins or other sweet candied fruits, I tend to just convert my oyster mushroom with a little bit of honey and some spice into the same thing as you would with sweeter fruit. So I love oyster mushroom. It also is the best source of lovastatin. So if you want to manage your cholesterol, here's a way that you can just eat yourself healthy. That's my favorite edible. But then I absolutely love a turkey tail, or a reishi mushroom. Lion's mane and I have an interesting relationship. And of course, I grow psilocybin. So you have to add that one for my mental health. Maybe they're all my children. Maybe I don't have a favorite.
We all feel that way about our children, don't we? We don't have favorites. Well, I've never thought about oyster mushrooms or any kind of mushrooms and making them sweet. So I love that tip. I do also love mushrooms. Are like shiitakes good for you?
Shiitakes are really good for you, but because of the temperature I'm working with, I'm in the tropics. Shiitake takes a lot longer to produce. An oyster mushroom will take me 21 days or so. Shiitake could be 6 months to a year and a half. Because of my social impact work, that is an unreasonable timeline for me. We also need hardwood in the production of shiitake. And Jamaica does not have a lumber industry. So it makes it difficult for my women to participate in growing shiitake. It's a vanity project whenever I do shiitake. The shiitake loves what you can give it in Canada, oak and maple and elm and those kind of wood, but I have none of that here in Jamaica.
I'm going to come back to, I would love to hear more about lion's mane, as would someone in the audience, because I've tried cooking with it before and I haven't had great success. But before we get on to lion's mane, will you talk a little bit more about the manure thing? And, you know, like when we're buying mushrooms in the grocery store, how do we know what it's grown in?
Well, basic knowledge is that some mushroom love a nitrogen-rich environment, and some mushrooms love an oxygen-rich environment. So my special attachment to oyster mushroom is because oyster has a lot in similarity with humans. It requires light, moisture, and oxygen. People require light, liquid, and oxygen. So it assimilates to my own system faster. When you look at some mushroom, like what you call the button mushroom and the portobello mushroom, they are both the same mushrooms. They are Agaricus bisporus variety. If you want it to be a button mushroom, you harvest it earlier. And if you want it to be a portobello, you allow it to grow a few days longer. And those mushrooms are very heavy in their nitrogen needs. And manure is a really great way of supplying nitrogen to the mushrooms, because they will just consume it and grow really fast on it. So I tend to like to find natural or organic ways to supply whatever nitrogen my varieties need. So when you're looking at it, the best that you can do is try and figure out, is this a mushroom that needs lots of nitrogen, and what's the cheapest source that a mushroom farmer would find to give it nitrogen?
Okay, and then let's jump to the lion's mane. So I try to incorporate lion's mane into my diet just because I've read that it's good for your brain, and Alzheimer's runs in my family. So I'm trying to stick with some of the mushrooms that are good for brain health. Can you talk a little bit about strategies with cooking lion's mane, and maybe what are some alternatives to brain healthy mushrooms?
Well, first thing you want to do is you don't really want to have lion's mane in your dinner late in the evening, or at least the lion's mane that we grow. You want to have your lion's mane around lunchtime, or have your lion's mane powder in a smoothie through the day to keep you going. Because if you have lion's mane too late in the evening, you probably need company, because you'll be sitting up and your brain will be going, and you'll want to have deep intellectual conversations late into the night. So the time you take your lion's mane is really important. You want to try that first thing in the morning instead of later at night.
So interesting. I had no idea. Maybe that explains some of my lack of sleep. That's so funny. How about other brain healthy mushrooms?
Well, reishi is good. Well, all mushrooms I think is good for you. And if you can't get great organic mushrooms, I still say go with what's available, because there will be some health benefit in it if you add mushroom to your diet. And mushroom has two things going for it that I think it's good to know. While it absorbs toxins in the environment, studies have shown that it holds onto those toxins, releases the nutrients in your body. And when they have done fecal testing, they've found out that the toxins that may have been in the mushroom tend to just travel through your system and leave. It doesn't stay in your body. So that for me is reassuring. So when I have an opportunity to eat mushrooms that I don't have information on, I reassure myself knowing that the intelligence of the mushroom is that it knows what to leave in my body and what to take out with the waste. That's one. Number two, everybody can cook mushrooms because the structure, the molecular structure of a mushroom allows it never to be able to be overcooked. So you can't, like once the heat has been applied for a mushroom, and most mushrooms should be dried or have heat applied, because that process kills surface toxins, but also releases special ingredients in the mushroom and make it available for you to consume.
I'm sorry, Terri, to interrupt. I didn't get that. So are you recommending that you purchase dried mushrooms?
Dried mushrooms, there are some mushrooms that you're only going to get dry. And that means like, if you can make a lovely risotto at the end of the day, and you want to add some wild chanterelles or morels and so on to it, and the only way you can get it is dried, go for the dried, rehydrate it and add it to your diet. I think it's fabulous, whether you have it in powdered form and you add it to your smoothie, or you have it dried and you can make a soup or add it to the meal you're taking. I would rather you have mushrooms than not have mushrooms.
And it sounds like I was planning to ask you about like the best cooking methods, like, is it best to be in oil or butter or low heat or high heat? But it sounds like it doesn't really matter. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I'm saying that you gotta be really a terrible cook not to be able to cook mushroom. You cannot overcook it. Once a mushroom you put it in your stew, you could keep it simmering for 5 hours, and the texture, the muscle in the mushroom will not disintegrate. You can't make it too soft. You're gonna have that great mouthfeel. You're gonna have the chewiness. Whether you saute it quickly with a little bit of olive oil or cooking oil and garlic, and put it on a nice slice of good bread and have some balsamic vinegar and olive oil to dip along with it, and then good glass of wine, whether that takes you 5 minutes, or you make a stew because you've bought some other stuff and this is your protein source, and so you're going to stew it for 5 hours. It doesn't matter how you do it, you can't overcook mushrooms.
Fascinating. I never would have guessed that. Okay, so how about the difference between fresh mushrooms and, say, purchasing the powdered form? I've read sometimes that the powdered form that you can add to smoothies can be mostly the mycelium portion of the mushroom and might not have the same medicinal qualities. Is that true?
That's true. That's where you have to research the company you're buying from. Because you are right. There are some folks that their products is not really about producing the fruiting body. The fruiting body is what you call mushroom. How do I say that? If you think of an apple tree, you can from the root of the apple tree to the trunks to the leaves of the apple tree, it's all technically the tree. But what you're going to make your applesauce out of is the actual fruit, which you call an apple. Well, you can think of mushrooms in the same way. The mycelium forms the root structure, forms the actual trunk structure, and everything that is going to produce the fruiting body called mushrooms. And so for a lot of people, and to make it economical, they inoculate their grains, whether it's rice or it's oats. And once it's fully inoculated, then it's processed as mushrooms. So that's what people mean. So when you get some supplements, then you could be having a lot of grains, or you have a lot of oats and a lot of carbs in it.
Okay, so it sounds like bottom line is it's best to eat fresh mushrooms. And I am curious from the audience, like, what are people's favorite mushrooms, and maybe even your favorite way to prepare them? Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is if you have a choice, always eat the mushroom for the best medicinal quality. And if you don't have that available, it's still good to get it either in powder form and put it in your smoothie, or even supplements, but that you recommend doing some research on the company. Is that correct?
That's what but there are some mushrooms that you cannot eat. Some mushrooms, don't taste very good. And like a turkey tail is very hard, but you want the benefits of a turkey tail because it's got great cancer fighting properties. So it's not, I can't make a blanket statement and say just eat your mushrooms. You have different mushrooms for different things. For me, psilocybin mushroom does not taste really good. So if you want to go do a good trip, you don't really want to eat psilocybin necessarily fresh. And sometimes it's not available in that way. So if you want wild mushrooms, or you want varieties of mushrooms that don't grow in your area, your options may be dehydrated mushrooms or mushroom powder.
Do you have any recommendations for some of the supplement brands that you would recommend?
Oh, girl, you want to get me killed, don't you?
Oh, sorry. Okay. You don't have to answer that question. Maybe I will include some in the resources that I follow up. That's really funny. Okay. So is now a good time to switch to psilocybin?
Sure.
Okay. So help educate us about psilocybins or magic mushrooms. And also, I'm really curious, like, are they a specific type of mushroom? Is it an additive? Are they grown in the same way? All of that good stuff.
Let's start with how they're grown. Psilocybin mushroom requires a nitrogen-rich atmosphere to grow in properly. And so most psilocybin mushroom requires a certain level of manure and a casing layer. So in a lot of ways, psilocybin mushroom is traditionally grown similar to how you grow button mushrooms. Wake's approach to growing it is that we use a mixture of bamboo leaves and lemongrass, which produces a very good nitrogen-rich substrate. And so we don't need to use manure or anything with ours. But it grows differently than the oyster mushroom first stage decomposers. So first stage decomposers are mushrooms that you commonly find in forest, and it loves to eat wood and leaves and anything that falls to the ground. That's the first mushroom that helps in the process of decomposing organic matter. So they grow just a little bit different than the first stage decomposers. Magic mushroom or psilocybin mushrooms, there are several. I think there are probably 5 or 6 major kind of species, but most of the ones that you will get on the market are cubensis. And they're just different subsets of the same species of mushroom. What makes it magic mushroom is the psilocin and the psilocybin, that content that it has in.
Okay, we do have a question that came up a little bit earlier about Florida and psilocybin mushrooms, because they are harvested from cow manure. And is there a big difference between psilocybin mushrooms that are grown from manure versus like the method that you just described, which is a lovely sounding method, by the way?
Well, you would have to say 95% of the mushroom, if wake is new in the fact that we don't use manure. And that is part genius of the team that we have, but it's also part the reality of the environment. We have over 56,000 hectares of bamboo growing across Jamaica that doesn't get used for anything. It's a weed crop. Because Jamaica is so mountainous, lemongrass grows all over the countryside. So these are easy substrate to find. In my area of Jamaica, there are no horses. I have to drive to the North Coast to see a horse. So I couldn't have a horse if eat manure in enough quantities anyway. So I don't know of anybody else in the world right now who is growing mushrooms the way that Wake is growing mushrooms.
Okay, and I should just, there are probably some people wondering about what Wake is. Can you just really quickly describe?
Wake is a bioscience fungi company, and Wake Network is a Canadian partner company to Wake Jamaica. And what happened is a marriage of the goals of a North American company intersected with the goals of a Jamaican social enterprise and came together. We were here in Jamaica growing mushrooms in our organic and innovative way, and Wake wanted to work in fungi, and that's what they do. So there was a coming together of the two objectives. They wanted to make sure that how they traveled the world was in believing in the triple bottom line. We had run what we were doing in Jamaica on the idea that every community that we entered would be better off financially, socially, and environmentally. And those were the same values that Wake Network had. And so there was a coming together of those values with our values in Jamaica, and we became a bigger team, producing mushrooms to heal the body, the mind, and the environment.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about healing the mind, because I think we've probably all done some reading about psilocybin and the research associated with it and how much it's helping like PTSD and other forms of mental health. Can you talk a little bit about the research that's being done?
Well, I know that for Wake, we are pushing through with making sure that we have science to back up our claims. So clinical studies and clinical trials are a very big part of what we're doing. But there is a lot of information coming back that says that psilocybin, unlike talk therapy, and there is a place for everything, and traditional pharmaceutical, psilocybin can actually, in a couple of trips, for some people, it's not for everybody, can have the end result of sorting out issues around addiction and anxiety and post-traumatic stress and all of those that you can get. It's an express way of dealing with some of these issues. But the other thing that Wake pushes, and we believe strongly in, is microdosing. And microdosing is where patients or individuals take very, very, very small amount of psilocybin every day or every other day to keep that, once they've reached that level, to keep that their mental health on a healthy, stable level. So we are studying both clinical immersion and microdosing to make sure that our products are backed by science.
And are you doing the same kind of research for macrodosing that you just referred to a couple seconds ago?
I think it's on the, well, I know it's on the list of things we want to do. COVID has had a big impact in delaying things. Wake had a couple of really important immersions with targeted communities just before COVID lockdown in 2020. But as things open back, yes, clinical immersion is a big part of the business strategy for Wake.
Help us understand about like the legality and the future of it. Do you think it will follow a similar course as marijuana did?
I think it's already going there, and it is happening at a faster rate than it did, in my opinion, than marijuana. For instance, marijuana sent a lot of young people to prison in Jamaica, whereas psilocybin never did. While Jamaica had signed on to the UN convention, we never had didn't know enough about it here in Jamaica, so it never made it onto the books of local laws. So I can run my business in Jamaica without being afraid that I'm going to get raided. So while I may have challenges in the exportation, I can grow psilocybin legally in Jamaica, and I can work around studying and understanding the technology of making a better product. I can work with the local universities to test to make sure that the products that we are producing have the effect that we want it to have. So psilocybin in a lot of jurisdictions did not carry the same stigma as marijuana does. So I think while marijuana becoming legal around the world in so many jurisdictions kind of swung the door open, I think because of the mental health benefits, and we have so many people addicted to so much prescription drugs, and we've got so much anxiety, and we've got so many things that isn't working with traditional approach to medication when it comes to mental health. I think when you have the FDA giving breakthrough drug status to psilocybin, we are actually on a faster highway to have it being accepted. And there's so much science at the moment that is falling behind mushrooms, and both medicinal mushrooms and psilocybin mushrooms, they are being studied. And there was already so much work when it got closed down. There were already so much research that had been done already.
So what is some of the research? Like, what do you feel the primary benefits of microdosing are? Like, where are you studying those treatments? Is it for depression? Is it for anxiety? What do you feel is the primary benefit?
Well, we can start with the studies. We're studying for anxiety here in Jamaica. We've been working out to our first study is our clinical studies around anxiety. But in my own life, depression has been one that I haven't had to deal with since I began microdosing. So I'm one of those individuals who could go for a while and I'm all right. And then there would be a trigger and I didn't know what that trigger would be. And then life slows down, outside is too bright and I want to stay inside and I'm miserable. What microdosing has done around me, I haven't had an episode of clinical depression, or it helped with my migraines. But in Wake, the next person you should talk to is our chief science officer. She is amazing. She could give you all of the reasons why it works. I just know that for me and for my women, it makes their lives better. Psilocybin gives me the emotional and mental space, not to freak out as much, not to be afraid. I was terribly claustrophobic, couldn't take an elevator by myself, and psilocybin solved that in one go.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sorry, Terri, just to ask this, did you feel like it was through microdosing, or did you do more of a macro dose that?
I had, and that's the other thing, magic mushroom or psilocybin has been proven not to be habit forming. So
I was going to ask that next. Thank you.
So I had 2 macro doses, and then I have maintained it over the last 2 years, with 1.5 to 2 years with my microdose.
Okay. And I assume that all macro dosing is done under the supervision of a therapist or some other qualified person. Is that true?
When Wake does a clinical immersion, then there are a crew, a team of professionals. So it is not just about take the pill, walk off, or it is about having the right therapies, having the activities, because you will hear this a lot with people who are in the community. The setting is important. Intention and setting is important. So you need the guide, you need the right environment. You know, so there's usually things like yoga and breath work and proper eating and support from the professionals that are there, because you need someone to help you to interpret sometime, or just make sure that you're okay.
And is that, I've read a little bit about those experiences as being part of ecotourism in Jamaica. Are there other locations that are doing similar things where they have trained professionals to help you through journeys of macrodosing?
I think it's like anything. You have great actors, and you have bad actors in everything. So you need to do the research. Jamaica has become a mecca for psilocybin therapy, for companies saying that they're doing research and things. So you have to be responsible. But yes, there are other people, other jurisdictions where people are doing it. It's like ayahuasca. A lot of people go to the Amazon, but other people are finding other ways to do it.
I just have to ask for microdosing. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going off script. But with microdosing, do you actually feel it? Do you feel any, is it psychedelic at all? Do you feel the effects of it?
You feel the effects of microdose, but you do not have a psychedelic experience. The difference between a mini dose or a macro dose and a microdose is worlds apart. It's, when you take your lion's mane and you don't really know what the lion's mane does, you just know that you're a little sharper for the day. Natural effect. I'm not seeing anything. The world doesn't slow down. I just know that I'm level. My mood is level. And I stack them. I take my microdose with lion's mane. So when I do my supplement in the morning, it's a stack of microdose of psilocybin, but some lion's mane to go with it. And I just know I'm sharper. I can keep more things, more balls floating, and I don't get as tired.
Interesting. I didn't know about that energy side of it, and that really makes me excited because I struggle with low energy. And so it's really good to know. Are there any questions from the audience? I know one that I have is about growing mushrooms. And is it pretty easy to do at home? Like, should we think about trying to grow mushrooms at home? Not necessarily psilocybin, but just medicinal mushrooms?
I think it never hurts. My grandfather always says, you can't learn less. So getting a kit and growing something is it's always a good exercise. Just the fact of watching something grow and knowing that you had something to do with it, you your input helped this thing come alive. Um, I think you should always try and grow something, whether it's some basil for your pesto or it's a mushroom for your brain. I would always recommend trying to grow some stuff. However, there is some downside. Don't try and grow more than one or two oyster mushroom kits because the oyster mushroom sporulates, and there is a certain amount of spores that your kitchen can handle or somewhere in your house can handle. If you get greedy and start trying to grow 10 oyster mushroom kits on your kitchen counter, it will attack the drywall in your house and your chipboard doors, and you will have mushrooms growing under your sink and in your ceiling and all over the place. But having a nice kit growing on your cupboard or someplace there, that's all right.
I might just try that. That was a great answer. Okay, a question that just was listed in the chat makes me remember that I should add a disclaimer that we are not doctors. Everything we're talking about is just from our own knowledge and we're just sharing. So, but the question is, can you microdose if you have seizures? I read that it can help or cure seizures. So again, this is a case where you would definitely want to talk to your doctor first and be under supervision. But Terri, handing it off to you.
Well, I, because of where I live at the moment, which is a rural community, I'm telling you that people in my community uses plant medicine is their go-to. It's not really going to the hospital, which will take a whole day, or not having the funds to go to the doctor. So I've seen people in my community that have applied microdose but remember, it is a micro dose. It's not a mini dose, it's not a macro dose, it's a micro dose, which means it's got such a small amount of active ingredients that is, you're not supposed to feel anything, it's not supposed to trigger. But like you said, I would recommend talking with your doctor before you take it, and make sure that your source of product is a clean source. We need to start asking those questions. How is my mushroom grown? How did you grow this?
Thank you. Any last questions? As I mentioned before, I will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered, and Terri and I will put together a list of resources. You can learn more about wake. Oh, I did. I am really glad that this was just asked about the Network of Women for Food Security. Terri, can you please share with us your work around this?
We started all of this mushroom in Jamaica started because a group of poor rural women and I wanted to find a fast turnaround way of supporting the family. We have had over the years an overuse of chemical fertilizer in the environment, or fruit trees being chopped down by groups of farmers. So the way that women in the rural areas have always supplemented their income was to collect fruit, tree fruits like mangoes and apples and so on, and then sell them in the store. So there was a big need in my part of the community to find some way to help the women supplement the food they were eating at home, because we have an overabundance of lifestyle illness in Jamaica: diabetes, high blood pressure, asthma, a lot of things like that. So the network of women started as a way of helping with food security. And we thought we could help in two ways. We could help women to create their own protein source by when they grow the mushrooms, but they could also buy the other food that they needed, because minimum wage is the equivalent of 50 American dollars a week. But if we could grow mushrooms and each woman could grow 5 pounds of mushroom a week, and we sell it for $25 a pound, then they would be further ahead. This is really, really simple math. So a lot of the women didn't have access to land. So we're working with poor landless women in rural Jamaica. So what can they grow that didn't require land space? And a mushroom house is really an amazing thing, because every layer, you could take a small space and then you could layer it to grow mushrooms in. And so that's kind of how we got started. And because of that work, we attracted people who wanted to grow mushrooms from around the world. When they found out that psilocybin was legal in Jamaica, we got tapped by everybody wanting to come to Jamaica. And it brought more light to the work that we were just quietly doing.
That's just fabulous. That is such important work. And it sounds like you're making great progress. If any of you are interested in learning more about Terri's work, I think the website is wake.net. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll include that in the email. There was a question that I didn't ask earlier about, are there forms of mushroom that can be used as a sugar additive? Like, I'm not sure if I'm asking this the correct way. Lisa, you can clarify, but do you know what I'm saying?
I think I know what you're saying. And my first answer would be, I bet there is. And if you're really interested in that stuff, I would say go read some of the works of the grandfather of mushrooms, which is Paul Stamets. He's been out in the wilderness calling out. He's a guy behind Fantastic Fungi. His company is Fungi Perfecti. So I would say there probably is. I have friends studying rust fungi to understand what it is that creates rust in metal. Other people studying around the medicine, because we know that there would be no antibiotic if we didn't have study in how fungi works in that way. So I would say there probably is. So I would do a little bit of research if that's something that we're interested in, but start by reading the work of Paul Stamets. He will probably have a little bit of information there on that.
He does a wonderful TED Talk that you can look up. It's called 6 Ways Mushrooms Can Save the World. It's so fun. Terri, thank you so much for your time this morning. And thanks to everyone else for joining us.
I think somebody just asked about using microdose to stop an addiction to ice cream. I can actually say that I've used microdose to get rid of an addiction to sugar. I liked candy, and like candies that are not good for you. And I'm not an ice cream girl, but I like candy, and it's worked for me. It's just, you think about it before you do it. That's one of the things that psilocybin does. It gives you mental and emotional space to ask yourself the question. So as far as my depression was concerned, every morning I wake up, psilocybin gives me a moment, about 17 seconds, for me to go, do I really need to do this? What kind of day am I going to have? I can choose in that 17 seconds if I'm going to replay the bad news from yesterday, or I'm going to make a new choice. And that's also what it does for me when I'm going to reach for something sweet. So I would say it helped me. So yeah, it may help you with your ice cream addiction, but
well, it's so exciting to think about the larger opportunities to help address addiction issues, not just with sugar, but with alcohol or drugs or whatever else. So to learn that it's not addictive itself is really exciting. That was one of my takeaways from today. So I am sorry that we are out of time, but Terri, again, thank you so much. Before you guys get off the phone, I do want to